Egyptian President al-Sisi, in a televised speech earlier today, talks about the rebuilding process of the Gaza Strip. When we talk about the day after, he estimates it's going to take about $90 billion to reconstruct the Gaza Strip. It's a large chunk of cash right there.
It's about a quarter of Egypt's total annual GDP. But look, I actually have myself written that I think it'll take about 100 billion. So CC maybe lowballing. The figure's huge. The entire Marshall Plan it was about $14 billion, which in today's money is just over $100 billion. But it wasn't, the Marshall Plan wasn't really to rebuild Dresden. It was to create economic infrastructure and to lower interstate barriers to a cooperation. It was a complex economic plan. In this case, this is the estimate of what it would take to rebuild homes of about 1 million people in Gaza. The place clearly has been badly trashed. The bigger problem, I think, than raising such a handsome sum, which I think can be done really with Gulf states and the Americans and Europeans and even Israel, is who to give it to and who do you trust to do the right thing with this money and not to build another underground tunnel system. It clearly cannot be Hamas because, I mean, we speak of the crisis of legitimacy on the Israeli side. It's nothing compared to the complete and total illegitimacy of Hamas. Therefore, job one is to create a political environment in Gaza where there is a local authority to who you can trust to work with you and with the Western powers and with the Arab states and with Israel to rebuild something that is viable and good, and is not just buildings but a new economy and a new infrastructure in every way locally to enable Gaza to be what it should be, which is a pleasant and prosperous strip of beach on the Mediterranean that maybe even has tourism. To even think in such terms today is utterly fantastical because of the satanic nature of the regime that has prevailed there for almost 2 decades, and that's the main challenge.
And you do bring up the main challenge, not only being rebuilding when it comes to the infrastructure, which is clearly a difficult challenge in itself, but rebuilding the ideology. I think that's the most difficult part when it comes, and how do you rebuild after the horrible destruction that many of these citizens have seen? They've been radicalized. How do you even hope to change that when they're so despaired right now?
Some societies are just condemned to misery for decades and generations, and there's not much you can do. I hope that's not the case with the Palestinians in general, and specifically those in Gaza, but for sure, an entire generation has been brainwashed for jihad. And also, they have been ruled by a criminal mafia that's running a theocracy, and they have not only had Israel be demonized, but Israel really has been in some ways their oppressor. So that part is real. All of this has to change. You need an entirely new reality in the Middle East. We speak of the Marshall Plan. George Marshall was the U.S. Secretary of State. There is a Secretary of State today, and he has a plan. The Blinken plan, I think, that would involve peace with the Arab world and a two-state dialogue in Israel and economic cooperation and a strategic alliance against Iran that would restructure the psychology of the region. That would be great. And right now, what's standing in the way largely is the Israeli government refusing to engage in this. So it's easy to be in the studio and say, look, the Palestinians need to be unbrainwashed. That's of course true. But Israel also has a piper to pay. You need a political change in Israel that will reach out to the outstretched hand from Saudi Arabia
in the near future. Is that likely? We're seeing the political rift and the divide in Israel continuing to grow every day, even when it comes to something like the hostage release deal, with it or not going through. We're seeing this divide.
In theory, the government has 64 out of 120 seats. And that's proven to be a firewall. Let's see what happens in coming months when, for example, a crisis looms about the Supreme Court's deadline to table a law normalizing the Haredi draft, right? If they really try to formally exempt a quarter of the Jewish males that are 18 from the draft at a time when the country's counting its dead by the hundreds and thousands, unfortunately, that could yield a political explosion in Israel. On the other hand, if they don't, table this law that was promised to the Haredim, the Haredi parties that control the fate of the government have already said that they would bring it down. So there's a lot of pressure points on this government. It suffers from, as I said, a true crisis of legitimacy, domestically and internationally. I am not so sure that it can forever resist the centrifugal forces that are bearing upon it.
As we're talking about the Israeli government, also we're hearing from the United States, VP Kamala Harris, in a televised interview, she said that it is important to negotiate or differentiate between the Israeli government and the Israeli citizens, showing
Absolutely.
that the United States will likely continue their support of Israel no matter what, is what it indicated.
Sure. Now, remember, everything that comes out of the mouth of a politician in the year of election has to be taken with a grain of salt. The U.S. administration has to find a way to both pacify the Muslims in Michigan and the progressive youth who they really need to turn out in November, and not lose the Jews and the centrists. So, yes. I find it a little bit depressing to hear that from Kamala Harris, frankly, because that's the kind of talk that we're used to directing at Gaza, right? Like, the people of Gaza deserve something better than their government, and we need to distinguish between the people of Gaza and, as I say, the satanic monsters of Hamas. But now you're hearing it about Israel, and that reflects the sense around the world that Israel's government is problematic. I'm choosing my words carefully.
As we all should. But Dan Perry, I appreciate your insight as always on all of these latest developments.